Gambia's COVID-19 deaths increase after 2 new deaths. Egypt has begun demolishing illegal buildings on farmlands. Human rights activists, victims, and diplomats are working on modalities to bring ex-President Jammeh to justice. These and more coming your way on This Week. It is 1900 GMT from our studios in Banjul. Many thanks for joining us. I am Amadou Kante, and now the news in detail. And we begin with the latest COVID-19 update, because Gambian health authorities confirmed 2 new COVID-19 deaths on Saturday, which makes a total of 102 deaths from the disease since March. 14 new cases were also recorded, taking the total number of COVID-19 cases to 3,376. The ages of those who newly tested positive ranges from 19 to 70 years. 35 new COVID-19 patients recovered and got discharged on Saturday. Meanwhile, 16 people were taken into quarantine as 45 others were discharged. The Gambia currently has 77 people in quarantine, 1,657 active cases, and 422 probable cases. And that is the latest update of the COVID-19 situation in the Gambia. Now, wildlife conservation regulations in the Gambia are created to protect wild animals from extinction. The Gambia currently has 6 wildlife protected zones occupying 3.5% of the country's total land area. Omar Ahmad Toure has more in this report.
The Gambia has strict laws prohibiting the killing and selling of wild animals. Despite these laws and the periodic raids by wildlife officers along tourist facilities and inside bushes, a clandestine practice of hunting and selling wild animals does exist. According to Gambia's Wildlife and Biodiversity Act 2003, anyone found guilty of killing a turtle faces a maximum fine of $50,000 or a maximum 2-year jail term or both. Maudo Jallo, a principal wildlife conservationist, said more sensitizations are needed to protect wild animal species such as turtles. He also said that the wildlife and biodiversity laws need adjustment to further protect wild species by arming wildlife guards.
So this existing law that we are making now, that will give us a strength to have this firearm operating in the Gambia. If when they don't allow us, they see us as a civilians, while without knowing that we can use any firearm they are having, then they can attach paramilitary to us, so that we can able to protect these species, and Gambian wildlife can be expand more than what we are having presently.
Marine turtles used to occupy some 80 kilometers of Gambian coastline, but their population has declined due to poaching. The reptiles now occupy only 34 kilometers of the country's coastline. Jallo, who is also the head of research and development at the Department of Parks and Wildlife, said the turtles must be protected because they contribute to the reproduction of fish by barring other aquatic species from consuming fish eggs.
I can tell you today, if we have more turtles in our seas, we'll have more fisheries, because they play a significant role in the sea. For this turtle you are seeing here is a cleansing officer in the marine environment, because they clean the area where the fish are laying their eggs. So without them, the number of eggs that are going to be hatched from the fish is going to be very minimal.
In May this year, hyenas under the protection of Abuko Nature Reserve escaped from their cages. One of the hyenas was killed by the youth of Tabokoto. Similarly, in June 2020, a stray crocodile was also killed by a mob in the street of Banjul. The Gambia has 117 species of mammals, 30 species of amphibians, and 47 species of reptiles, making a total of 194 species of wild animals. But these species face imminent danger from poachers. Attempts to protect nature and wildlife dates as far back as 1916, when the Abuko Nature Reserve was protected as a water catchment area and given reserve status in 1968. The 1977 Banjul Declaration was signed to complement legislation to protect Gambia's flora and fauna. For iAfrica TV, I am Omar Ahmad Toure.
The killing of wildlife animals is prohibited in the Gambia. And from the report, up next, we head to the United States because Donald Trump's assertion that the coronavirus will be weakened in the month of April, where the weather is much warmer, is far from true. On Friday, the Center for System Science and Engineering CSSE at Johns Hopkins University revealed that the number of COVID-19 cases exceeded 6 million. Ibrahim John has more details of that in this report.
The coronavirus has done more havoc in the United States than its birthplace, China. The United States now registered more than 6 million COVID-19 cases and more than 100,000 people who contracted the virus have died. The United States still has the highest number of COVID-19 cases and death toll in the world. On Thursday, U.S. media reported that a new study has found the number of confirmed COVID-19 cases in America to be low due to a lack of testing. Researchers at the School of Public Health, University of California in Berkeley, stated in a report that the recorded cases in the United States does not capture the total burden of the pandemic because testing has been primarily restricted due to limited test availability. The research, which was published in the journal Nature Communications, vividly stated that the United States could have recorded over 6 million COVID-19 cases by April 18. However, only 700,000 plus confirmed cases were said to have been counted. Reporting for iAfrica News, I am Ibrahim John.
And from the report there, we come back home because the COVID-19 pandemic has not only affected the health of the people, but is also tearing apart people's livelihoods and has not spared mechanics either. Our Makalo looks at how they are faring amidst the pandemic.
Mechanics in the Gambia are struggling to make ends meet after their work slowed due to the impact of the coronavirus pandemic. People in the trade of repairing vehicles like Sidi Bojang said they have seen a lower number of customers visiting their garage as a result of the pandemic.
Any person that comes here now does complain of not having money. Some even have to park their vehicles here for days or more than that. You see, we are having lots of vehicles parked here, and the owners are not coming for them due to the virus, they said. Some said they cannot afford the materials needed for their cars to be repaired, and in those cases, I just have to give them more time. And sometimes after repairing someone's vehicle, the owner will complain of not being financially stable. So I have to park it here.
Omar Jassi, also a mechanic, sometimes sit for a whole day without seeing a customer. He said life has been very difficult because earnings have been cut by the pandemic.
Our opening hours are morning to evening, 6 p.m. Sometimes we do not have any customer a whole day because people are scared of leaving their houses in this pandemic.
Some of the mechanics who spoke to iAfrica TV said the pandemic has not only affected their work, but also put their families into a lot of financial difficulties. For iAfrica TV News, our Makalu.
Mechanics were affected by the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic in the Gambia. Now to matters of the education sector, because the COVID-19 pandemic has severely affected the education system of the Gambia, leading to the total close of schools, universities and colleges. The Gambia's Ministry of Education and Basic and Secondary Education is putting up mechanism for the reopening of schools, though a date has not been announced. Ibrahim Kebi Sonko has more details of that in this report.
Education authorities are worried about what will happen to students when schools, especially private schools, are unable to reopen at the same time as government-run schools. The Deputy Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Basic and Secondary Education, Adama Jumba Job, said the ministry might not be able to cater for all students if private schools are unable to reopen due to the impact of COVID-19.
We cannot construct classrooms within the next month. We cannot. So what would happen to those children that do not have or do not have the teachers? We cannot buy teachers over the shelf. As I was saying when we started, we will even appeal to all the teachers in other sectors to come back, even if it is a day or two, to support education. The teacher requirement is far more than what we can produce. Teachers are not purchased over the shelf. It takes 2-3 years to train them.
There are also worries as to whether overpopulated schools will be able to implement coronavirus safety measures when schools reopens. Adama Jumba Job said the Ministry of Basic Education needs more teachers, classroom and furniture to be able to implement WHO and the Ministry of Health COVID-19 preventive guidelines.
We wouldn't want to come or declare opening of school only to realize that there are certain number of children you cannot accommodate. They'll be in the streets. Are they not Gambians? Don't they have the right to be in school? It is our prerogative as a ministry to make sure that we provide basic education, basic and secondary to every Gambian child or any child living in the country. The private schools have been talking about their problems. If, for example, God forbid, they decide to close because they don't have the resources, those children have to come to us. Do we have the places to accommodate them? No.
The Gambia faces a number of challenges in its attempt to reopen schools, and where some private schools are unable to resume lessons due to fund or other factors created by the pandemic, education authorities said a lot of students will be left out. For iAfrica TV, I'm Ibema Kebi Songo.
Education authorities working on modalities on how to reopen schools amidst the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, there's more news coming ahead, but for now, we'll take a short break and come back shortly. Stay with us. Welcome back, and many thanks for joining us once again. We continue because a single-story building which collapsed in Banjul today has families trapped inside. The building is situated at a junction between Anglesey and Lamin Street, now referred to as the OAU Boulevard in Banjul. One person is reported to have broken a leg and several people sustained injuries when the residential building collapsed on Saturday afternoon. According to media reports, video footage seen by Africa TV saw rescue workers and residents in the area helping the victims. No deaths were reported as we aired this story. It is not immediately clear what caused the apartment building's collapse. About a dozen people were extracted from the building and taken to the Edward Small Francis Teaching Hospital in Banjul. And from that unfortunate situation in the Banjul there, where a story building collapsed, we move on because a group including human rights defenders, victims of rights abuses, diplomats and international experts are looking at ways of prosecuting people who allegedly bear the greatest responsibility of human rights violations and abuses under Jammeh's 22-year rule. It is unclear where exactly the prosecution of the alleged crimes would take place, but the impending trial of alleged human rights violations is nevertheless expected to commence after the conclusions of the TRC hearings in early 2021. Ibrahim John has more details of that in this report.
Plans are underway for the possible prosecution of alleged human rights violations committed under Yahya Jammeh's rule from 1994 to 2017. The Rose Lockism Foundation is spearheading the campaign for this to be a reality. Experts on international criminal law, the Minister of Justice, the victims, and potential donors are looking into the possibilities of trying the perpetrators in domestic courts or via hybrid court within or outside the jurisdiction of the Gambia or an international criminal court. International legal experts, members of the Gambian judiciary, victims, and civil society organizations have actively participated in the consultation for the establishment of a post-TRRC court for alleged perpetrators. On 29th June 2020, a virtual meeting was organized for a consultation on post-TRRC prosecution in which Justice Raymond C. Sock of the Supreme Court made these remarks.
I'll start by congratulating the conveners of this consultation who, in spite of the global challenges of COVID-19, have succeeded in bringing together virtually such an impressive group of people dedicated to the pursuit of justice for all and firm entrenchment of the rule of law in our societies. The attainment of such noble objectives calls for selfless dedication and commitment, particularly in the present global climate in which impunity seems to thrive and accountability relegated to the back burners of history. However, on all the burners of this consultation is the foregoing of a post-TRRC mechanism for accountability appropriate for the Gambia and fostering closure and reconciliation for all Gambians.
Post-truth commissions have not always brought justice to the victims of human rights abuses in some quarters. Gambia's case will depend on the government's commitment to the implementation of recommendations for prosecution after the truth hearings. Reporting for iAfrica News, I am Ibrahim John.
And from that report there by Ibrahim John, we stay home because making a new constitution, or making a supreme law rather, is an important part of a series of reform undertaken by the Gambia government in a post-dictatorship era. But the idea of who should become a citizen as provided by a draft constitution has been a contentious issue among Gambians. Mariama Cham reports.
Lawmakers in the Gambia are set to begin debates on the new draft constitution on Monday when the Third Legislative Assembly opens. One contentious issue that will be addressed during these sessions is the issue of citizenship. According to Section 15, subsection 1 of the new draft constitution, a person shall become a citizen of the Gambia if, at the time of his or her birth, one or both of his parents or grandparents is or was a citizen of the Gambia. Some people agree with this provision while others disagree. Abu Jallo, a resident of Wellingara, is of the view that anyone born in the Gambia should be a Gambian regardless of whether their parents or grandparents are Gambians.
I don't agree with that law. If you see, even in America, people give birth there and acquire citizenship without being one. So anyone born in a particular country, you are a citizen of that country, no matter what. So anyone born in a particular country, you are a citizen of that country, no matter what, even if both parents are not citizens. To me, what brings citizenship is when you are born in a country, it doesn't matter where your parents are from.
Mama Chati, a resident of Talinding, disagrees. She is of the view that where none of one's parents is a citizen, a child born in the Gambia should not be a citizen.
You and your husband are both from Senegal and have a child who is born in the Gambia. That child cannot be a Gambian because you will not leave that child here. Give citizenship to those who are Gambians. I am a Gambian. My parents and great-grandparents are Gambian, so we should be qualified to have citizenship.
Mbege, a resident of Balangar, also disagrees with the law. He said a child born in the Gambia to non-Gambian parents should not be a citizen.
I agree with the law. If there is another way the child can be born here, with a parent being a Gambian, then I agree with the child acquiring citizenship. Or the mother is a Gambian and the father is not, then that child can be a Gambian. Both parents who are not Gambians and have a child in the Gambia, and that child is given citizenship, I don't agree with that.
The issue of who should be a Gambian citizen has been addressed by Gambia's laws and it has been evolving. According to the 1970 Constitution, a child born in the Gambia can only be a citizen when the father is a Gambian. The 1997 Constitution improved on that by stating children can acquire citizenship by birth where either of parents is Gambian. The new draft Constitution expanded this by stating that children born in the Gambia can acquire citizenship where their parents or grandparents are Gambians. If the new constitution comes into effect, all citizens by descent will become citizens by birth. The new constitution is expected to be adopted by the National Assembly with amendments. It will require a 75% vote from lawmakers to move to a referendum. Gambia's Independent Electoral Commission has set the date for a referendum on 5th June 2021. For iAfrica News, I am Mariama Cham.
The first reading of the new draft constitution will be done on Monday by the Justice Minister when the National Assembly resumes business. Now, finally, we head to North Africa because the demolition of illegal buildings on farmlands has begun in Egypt after the government warned building owners to pay fines and receive license or else risk losing their properties. After many years of negligence, Egyptian president says his government will no longer accept illegal occupation of lands meant for farming. Experts say some buildings are not constructed at ideal locations and are a threat to national security. Here's more details of that in this report.
For decades, the Egyptian government has been somewhat tolerant of farmland encroachments. The result was a massive expansion in buildings over agricultural land. President Sisi says the government will no longer tolerate this policy and any violations will be immediately demolished. In 2017, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi gave a 3-year ultimatum to owners of all structures built before that year on farmland to pay fines and receive licenses in return. A zero-tolerance policy against all violations was to start in the same year. After a 6-month extension of the deadline, the Egyptian government is now launching a demolition exercise to bring down unlicensed buildings.
If it becomes necessary, I will order the Egyptian army to inspect Egyptian villages. I will not allow this to happen. The government, with the governors, will take all measures needed. We have enough equipment to demolish all these illegally built structures.
Since 2011, at least 2 million acres of agricultural land has been encroached on. 3.2 million buildings were constructed illegally. Using satellite imaging, the Ministry of Urban Development is surveying the entire country and reporting all violations of building laws to the authorities.
We've seen buildings 18 and 20 stories high in every narrow street, which tarnishes the landscape of the country as well as put many in danger with this random construction, which usually does not abide with safety regulations. Egypt is now looking at these encroachments as threats to national security. It's now a matter of life and death.
While these violations are said to be widening the food security gap in Egypt and wasting many job opportunities, people living in the rural areas say they don't have alternatives.
Many of those who build on agricultural land do not do so to defy the government. They are people who struggled to get small loans and small parcels of land to build a house for themselves and their kids. There are those who intentionally build additional floors. Their buildings deserve to get demolished, but many others are poor.
The government has built community housing projects for those who need shelter, but getting the required finances and paperwork is quite challenging for many of those working in the informal economy.
And that report there, of course, in Cairo, Egypt, eventually brings next week's news bulletin to an end. But for more details on this, as always, and other stories, of course, you can log on to our website on africa.tv. Well, for now, though, many thanks for the pleasure of your company. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, and bye for now.